Last night, I spoke a little bit about the transition between last week's Torah portion and this week's Torah portion. I spoke about how, for me, it's actually one of the starkest transitions and most important transitions as we move from basically a book and almost a half of stories into law, into mundane details of how we live our lives. And if we want to make that moment even more stark, last week was the Ten Commandments, right? It was really the apex, the climax of our story, right? And then all of a sudden, the entire tone of everything shifts from storytelling to halacha, to law, and to details. And I spoke last night about the message, I think, that is in this, which is we as Jews have two incredibly powerful parts of our tradition. We have our stories and our values that fill our hearts, that fill our minds with the way to look at this world. And we have our day-to-day rituals that we're supposed to live our lives, the patterns by which we live our lives. And the fact that they are juxtaposed with one another is telling us probably one of the most important truths that we have within our tradition. You can't live in those separately as a Jew. We have to bring them together. It's not enough just to live our life under a certain pattern and a certain rhythm. We need to infuse those with the values that are so much a part of who we are. And by the same token, it's not enough just to have those values if we don't actually live our life in a way that is reflective of those values. And I see people nodding their heads, and I see people saying, oh, that makes sense. But here's the challenge. Sometimes that's hard. Sometimes that's hard. In those moments when it's difficult, in those moments when we don't want to, in those moments when our own emotions, our own thoughts, our own lives, whether it's in our personal domain, our family domain, our community domain, or the world domain, pushes us in a way that we look at ourselves and we say, that's not who we are. The way we're reacting, the way we're responding, the way we're feeling is not the way we want to be. Then what do we do? And so I'm going to follow up by saying this very parsha speaks to that point. That's where it starts. It actually starts by saying, look, when you've got a slave, how are you going to treat that slave? That's how this week's parsha starts. If you look at Parashat Mishpatim, page 456, 457, El HaMishpatim asher tasim lifnehem, these are the rules that you shall set before them. When you acquire a Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th year he shall go free. If he came in single, he shall leave single. And it goes into a very detailed description of how we treat someone who we actually see as other. Not part of us, not part of our family. Yes, in this case, a Hebrew slave, but as other. And it continues. And if you look through these particular mitzvot, these are the hard ones. These are, how do we treat one another in this world? Even when it comes to simple things, right? My ox runs into your ox. Neither of us has insurance. What do? Right? There's a pit. An ox falls into it. What is our responsibility? All of these values are not easy. Shabbat's easy. Not easy always to do. But the concept of Shabbat is easy for us. We get it. We human beings, we need a time to rest. We can't work 24/7 every single day. We need that. We get it. We need family time. We get it. Even things like keeping kosher. Okay, we get the fact that we're supposed to curb some of our urges. We need to think about the world in terms of holiness as opposed to just our animalistic instincts. A little more difficult, but we get it. Whether we do it or not is a different issue, but at least we understand it. But when we get to this week's Parsha, it challenges us in ways that we really haven't been challenged up until this time. And so if we look, for example, at chapter 23, verses 4 and 5, we're on page 471. When you encounter your enemy's ox or ass wandering, you must take it back to him. When you see the ass of your enemy lying under its burden and would refrain from raising it, you must nevertheless raise it with him. What? What do you mean? Why? It's probably one of the most challenging sections of this parsha. And it's not just somebody that you don't like. This is your enemy. And yet we're supposed to do that. And the question is, why? Why? And we say to ourselves, well, I don't want to do that for this person. But that's the point. You're not doing it for them. We're doing it for us. Because to allow our enemies to turn us into a person that is not reflective of our values allows them to win a war that we can't afford to lose. I'll say that again. To allow our enemies to turn us into people that we are not, that we shouldn't be, we have given them a victory far greater than any land or any political negotiation can. And our rabbis picked up on this early on. In Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael, one of the early halachic midrashim, it says, Lo tomer son'ai hu, hareini minicho, ele kapa yitzircha ve'aseh. Don't say, he is my enemy, I'm going to leave him. Rather, subdue your inclination and assist him. The Midrash understands it's hard. The Midrash understands it's not what we want to do. And yet it's saying your own yetzer, your own inclination, your own yetzer hara is coming up and is making you behave in a way that isn't Jewish. And it's our job to conquer that. Sefer HaChinuch picks it up later on and says literally, this practice, i.e. these verses, trains a person in the quality of compassion and uproots cruelty from the heart. If we can treat even our enemies with our own Jewish values, imagine how we're going to treat our friends, how we're going to treat our community. The Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, picks up on it as well. In the name of Rava, Rava says it's a mitzvah to unload an enemy's burden before loading a friend's, and loading it before unloading it in order to subdue one's inclination. It's not about them. It's about us. And our tradition is always challenging us to behave the way that we need to behave, no matter what's going on in the world around us. And it is a challenge. It's difficult. It's hard. But when we do that, when we allow ourselves to be true, we feel our feelings. But we make sure that we respond in a way that's appropriate. We are now upholding the values that we've just read about all the way through, that we received at Mount Sinai. That's why I believe we start with these. We don't start with the easy stuff. We start with the hard stuff. And it's hard. I'm angry. I'm angry. And it makes me act and think and behave in a way that's not my normal self. I don't want to give them that victory. I need to find a way to come back to who I am and respond the way that I would respond. Then, those are the things, frankly, that I'm in control of. I'm not in control of what happens and who's released and who's alive and who's not alive. That's out of my control. But if I allow them to control the way that I respond, that is a battle I am not willing to lose. And this week's Parsha is so apropos to us right now, because I've spoken to so many people who have said in one way or another, I'm not myself. Parashat Mishpatim challenges us to find our way back to ourselves, even when it's hard. Shabbat Shalom.